Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. I am returning to Brown Landone today. I had a previous episode where we discussed Brown Landone in the reading ABC of Truth, 35 Lessons in New Thought. He has a different style, as they all sort of do. There's a book that he wrote that I really enjoy called The Success Process, and there's a chapter I want to read called Vivid Thinking. It's the process of vivid thinking. It's a technique, a sort of explanation that really guarantees success. The idea of combining vivid imaging and idealized doing. I think you're going to like this if you are in the process of trying to use your visualization and imagination to create reality. Going back to this old teaching will be very helpful. The process of vivid thinking, which makes success certain. Some principles are so simple that we often overlook their significance. For instance, success is lack of failure. Each failure is due to some mistake. Each mistake in action originates in some mistake in thinking. To change from failure to success, it is necessary to develop those processes of thought which prevent mistakes and which lead to success. There is a process of success. It is a dual process. The first step is vivid imaging. In thinking, it is the subject of this chapter. The second step is idealized doing. It is the subject of the next chapter. This dual process, vivid imagining and idealized doing, guarantees success. You've often been told that success comes to the man who uses his brain. That is, to the man who thinks. But mere thinking will not prevent him from making mistakes. Neither will purposeful thinking, nor well thought out plans. Thinking in vivid images is the only process which always prevents mistakes. Even great experts make mistakes when they fail to think in vivid images. The Great Quebec Bridge fell down in the process of construction. All the factors determining its construction had been given careful thought by great engineers. There had been months of exact figuring and calculations of stress and strain. Certainly the engineers and constructors did not intend it to collapse, delay their work, injure their reputation as bridge builders, and cause loss of life. Yes, it did collapse, and hence someone, evidently many engineers, made some serious mistake in thinking, overlooking some important factor. Can much mistake in examining a plan, no matter what it is, be prevented? Can they always be prevented? As you study the failure of the noted engineers who planned the Quebec Bridge and the colossal blunder of the great engineers who planned two of the subway of New York City, you'll be convinced the most expert and careful thinking about a plan and the most exact examination of it do not guarantee success, nor prevent failure. You will also be convinced that nothing but vivid images can prevent such failures. This study will not mean much to you unless you realize that an idea differs from a mental image, and unless you discriminate between the process of thinking in ideas and that of thinking in vivid images. Your mind is a living consciousness, but you often permit the greater part of its content to die. The content is usually a colony of corpses, of images, which were once alive. That is the difference between ideas and vivid images. Ideas are the dead corpses of images, which were once living and vivid. In their mind, the successful inventive genius forms vivid images of every part of the machine which they are constructing. Before it is made, they mentally see each part separately, and all parts assembled and working together. After examining a new machine, he is able at any time to re-image a picture of the machine. He re-sees the image when the physical object is no longer present. That is thinking in vivid images. You look at the same machine, but after leaving it, you are able only to think about it. That is thinking in ideas. Vividness is a quality of mind which makes geniuses, and it can be developed. When you read "The iron is hot," you think of the idea of heat. When you accidentally put your fingertip on the red-hot iron, your mind thinks in vivid images of special heat, because an image is the immediate result of sense impressions. A vivid image is formed by sense impressions. So you can develop vividness in thinking by use of your special senses, by use of all of them. There are more than 5 special senses. There are 12. There are color, sound, smell, taste, balance, motion, direction, heat, cold, weight, tactility, and pressure. Images formed by using only a few senses may lead to mistakes. Vivid images formed by using all of the senses are infallible. Success begins by testing every factor of your plan by vivid sense images. That means testing what you plan to do by mental pictures formed by use of all of the senses. If you're testing a thing, use the special senses themselves. If you are testing plans or proposition, use the sense images. But why do vivid images test with more certainty than do ideas? Why is the test more certain than the most careful thinking of an engineering expert? Because thought without vivid imaging is never complete. If you merely think about a yard or foot or an inch, you do not image it exactly. Test yourself. Can you, without a measure, draw a line which is exactly a yard long? Can you do it every time you try to do it? If not, you do not image a yard. The image of a yard is more definite, more concrete, and more exact than is the idea or thought about a yard. This explains the catastrophe of the Quebec Bridge. The engineers were trained to think about yards and pounds, stresses and strains, but they failed to image them. The thought about a pound is no more like the image of a pound than the 3 letters cat are like your cat. Success begins by preventing mistakes in thinking. You can prevent such mistakes by idealizing common sense. Common sense alone is not enough. Common sense is the unified use of certain senses, unified so many times by so many people that such use has become common. Idealized common sense is different. It includes all the sense images which should be included in the vivid images. Mistakes can be prevented only by testing every factor of your plan by vivid images. For example, note how I was taken in when I failed to use all the senses which should have been used. Some time ago I was nosing around in one of the antique shops I ran across a massive silver tray. I know from past experience that all such antique silver trays are solid silver, but in the old days they made no plated ware. Common sense told me that silver tray is a genuine antique because the pattern is old, the form is old, the workmanship appears to be old, and it has the stamp of a long time past. The shopman turned the tray this way and that so that I might see all the things for myself. After examining it carefully, I decided to buy it. I paid for it and I sent it home. I was at home when it arrived. I opened the package myself and lifted the tray out of its box. Then I lifted it again and carried it into the dining room. I was pleased at having discovered this old tray, but already some newly awakened image was beginning to puzzle my mind. Some vague something said that another vague something was not just right. At first the idea was very vague, then it became clear. Finally I thought, this tray does not seem to be as heavy as a solid silver tray of its size should be. I picked it up again, I tested it by my sense of weight. It was not as heavy as a silver tray of that size would have been. In the shop, I had not lifted it. I had allowed the shopman to do that, hence I had not used all of the senses I should have used in forming a vivid image of that tray. That I had been taken in was proved to me when I took it to a reliable silversmith who showed me the tray, although a marvelous imitation, was after all made of lightweight metal thickly plated with silver. In the shop in which I purchased the tray, I had used sight in looking at it. I had used my senses of motion and direction in perceiving its form and size. I'd used my sense of sound both in listening to what the shopkeeper said and in listening to the sound produced when the tray was tapped, but I had not used my sense of weight. In purchasing that tray, I was a failure. I failed when examining it because I did not make my image vivid and complete. In subsequent chapters, you will discover the use of the special senses is the only certain means of success in buying and selling. This is important because the process of buying and selling as part of every effort in attaining success. The first step in the process of success is vivid imaging, with special emphasis on the vividness of the images. This is very important because every idea or thought or judgment is based upon mental images. If the images of your thoughts are not vivid, make them so by adding more special sense qualities. In other words, train and develop your special senses. It is important that you do so, for the success of every step of your thought and action depends upon vivid imaging. I'm not basing this assertion upon a pet theory, but upon the phenomenal successes of those who have used vivid imaging and the sad failures which have come to some of the biggest men in the world when they failed to think in vivid images. Note this colossal failure made by scores of expert engineers. For 6 years, several great engineering experts were engaged in planning and constructing the dual subway system from the center of New York City to Queens. One of the lines runs under the East River and 42nd Street. The other runs under the river at 60th Street. The two join at the Bridge Plaza in Queens. The engineers of the two great companies worked together for several years so that the track extending from this junction out on Long Island might be used for cars of both companies. Yet all the engineering plans and careful inspection and checking up of blueprints, all the figuring of details by experts, and all the reviews of figures made so that the engineers might be certain that every factor was correct, did not prevent one of the most ridiculous and stupendous failures which has ever been made in engineering construction. Remember that this mistake was not made by amateurs. It was made by scores of engineers, experts, and by hundreds of assistants and mathematicians who had years of engineering experience. This is the stupid mistake which was made. Concrete beds were laid for the rails, concrete stations were built, and since the gauges of the cars of both companies, that is, the distance between the wheels, were exactly the same, every one of these experts thought that it would be possible to run the ears of both companies on the same tracks. They continued to think this for 6 years. But after all the concrete work for miles of subway had been finished, after the platforms had been laid, after one company had been using the lines for a year and the tunnel of the other company was nearly completed, then and then only it was discovered by someone that although the wheels of all cars were equidistant, the floors of the cars of the two companies were not the same in width. If the station platforms had been made wide enough to permit the wide cars of one company to pull into the station, then when the narrower cars of the other company pulled in, there would have been 8 or 10 inch space between the platform and the cars. This, with tens of thousands of people stepping on and off cars daily, would mean the number of accidents would be greatly increased. Hence, it became evident that it would be necessary either 1, to lay 2 sets of rails, or 2, tear down the concrete construction work of the platforms, making them wide enough to permit the wider cars to enter the stations, and adapting them to the narrower cars by adding sliding floor edges to each platform so that the edges could be slid out each time a train of narrower cars pulled in. This gigantic failure, ridiculous if it were not so serious, was the result of well thought out plans, carefully estimated, every detail of which had been figured out by some of the greatest civil engineers in the world and checked up by expert mathematicians. Vivid imaging would have prevented the mistake. If only one man of all the hundreds of engineers employed during the 6 years had vividly imaged nothing else but the 2 kinds of cars, if instead of thinking about cars, he had vividly imaged them, imaging the front or the back ends of the 2 kinds of cars, he would have seen that the bodies of the cars of one company were a foot wider than the bodies of the cars of the other company, even though the wheels of each kind of car were the same distance apart. And more, if he had vividly imaged these cars running along the tracks and pulling into the stations, he would have seen that 2 cars of different widths could not enter the same stations, with platforms a fixed distance from the rails. The most expert thinking and planning without definite vivid imaging often leads to failure. Failure to image any one part if it is only the end of a car in the building of an entire subway system, may result in stupendous failure and cost millions of dollars to remedy the defects. I write almost nothing about reasoning and judging, and I omit these subjects purposely. If your imaging is vivid, you cannot make a mistake in reasoning or in judging. Yet what thousands of failures have resulted from mistakes in selection of plans, processes, propositions, and people due to lack of vivid imaging. The saneness and safety of all thought processes depends on the completeness of the vivid images which form your thought. Vivid imaging is the thought process which always wins success. Since vivid imaging builds new structure in the brain, extraordinary results are attained when one is trained by vividly imaging the process of doing that which one wishes to learn to do. For years, I had trouble each time I engaged a new stenographer. If I hired one who had just finished a stenographic school course, I found that she had to learn all over again, although she had been given the best training stenographic schools give. I studied the problem to discover the cause. In stenographic schools, the first work done by the student when learning stenographic characters is done by means of the eye. A book is used, and the student studies the characters, learning the form of each by seeing it. This embodies the form image of each stenographic line or symbol in the brain center of sight. Next, the student learns to transcribe these characters by muscle movements of the hands and fingers. But each time, the stenographer takes dictation from an employer. She is compelled to perceive that which he dictates by hearing it. She then perceives the sounds of the words dictated by use of her ears, not her eyes. Thus, the impressions of the sounds of the words are registered in the brain center of hearing, not in the brain center of sight. To secure efficiency, the brain centers of hearing should be related to motor brain centers which move the muscles of the hands and fingers. Of course, in the schools, dictation is given during training, but the harm has already been done by teaching the sight form of the symbols first instead of the sounds. Now, when I need another stenographer, I pick out a young person who has the ability to learn but who has little or no knowledge of stenography. I blindfold the person and teach him to learn the stenographic characters, first by movements of the hands and fingers, that is, by making the movements necessary to make the symbols. This is made possible by charts of raised symbols which are raised in the same way as are letters in books for the blind. This first step in learning stenography embodies a vivid image of the form of each symbol in the brain, which must be used when the stenographer begins to transcribe his dictation. At the time I teach each movement, I repeat the sound of which the character is the symbol. By this method, the brain center of hearing and the brain center of movement are at once related. As a result, stenography is learned in a few hours, an hour a day for a couple of weeks, instead of taking months to learn it. Moreover, the student is an efficient stenographer as soon as the characters are learned in this way. And the vivid imaging prevents mistakes in thinking. You made a mistake in buying that suit last month because you thought that the suit possessed certain qualities which it does not possess. You were a failure in making that purchase. You failed because you thought that suit possessed qualities like the qualities you wished it to possess. And 2, you thought it possessed those qualities because you failed to think in images vivid enough to note how it differed from what you wished to buy. Men who become great successes make decisions because of differences, not because of likenesses. Do likewise and be successful. It is so easy to perceive likeness. It is the lowest kind of mind action. It is not complete. It leads to mistakes. It leads to failure because it is due to thinking in ideas instead of vivid images. Qualities of likeness may attract you, but only vivid imaging of differences leads you to decide wisely and prevent mistakes. You are a young man. You like a certain friend of your sister. She may perhaps be your sweetheart. She's a charming girl, beautiful blue eyes, dark hair, trim of form and grace in movement. One day as you come from your office and turn up the street, you see a young lady walking a little ahead of you. She is trim, neatly dressed. Her hair is dark in clothes and form. She looks like the friend of your sister. You hasten your step to overtake her. It is the likeness which attracts your attention and the likeness which attracts you. As you hurry to catch up with her, you note how gracefully she walks. Her carriage and movement are like those of your friend. Your heart beats faster. You catch up with her. You lift your hat, flash a smile, and speak. She turns and says, "Lord a mercy, you sure are the most daring mash." You made the mistake because you thought of likeness, and certainly your first glimpse of a single difference convinces you that you did make a mistake. In all selling efforts, present qualities of likeness to attract an interest and create desire in the minds of others, and then present qualities of differences to convince and close the deal. The vivid imaging process of thought prevents failures by preventing them at the beginning. By preventing mistakes in your thinking, selections by likeness alone leads to mistakes and brings failure. Vivid images compel your mind to see differences. A few years ago, oil was discovered in California, west of the Coast Mountain Range. There, the wells were gushing thousands of dollars of oil each day. At the time, a friend of mine visited the desert lands east of the mountain range, and in the crevices of a gully accidentally found chunks of earth soaked with oil. He felt and looked like the oil-soaked earth found in the oil region on the other side of the mountains. In his mind, he saw oil gushers in this region like those of the west of the mountains. In his imagination, he saw himself many times a millionaire like the men who discovered oil west of the mountains. As several people knew that he was on that trip, he kept Miss Discovery to himself and invested all of his savings in that desert land. To secure additional options, he borrowed all he could borrow. All his thought and action were based on the recognition of likeness. Then, the experts found a difference. It looked like oil, but it was not oil. It felt greasy just as petroleum feels greasy, but it was not petroleum. It was no commercial value whatever, and he was financially ruined. The use of vivid imaging to perceive differences quickly secures the same results which are secured by long drawn-out efforts of efficiency experts. A few years ago, I was interested in a hotel property in Paris. It did not pay a good profit, so I spent a few hours in the dining room and kitchen to watch the service of those working there. I had the measurements of kitchen, serving room, and dining room sent to my studio, and there worked out a plan for remodeling those rooms. The changes were made. As a result, the number of those required to do the work was reduced 40%. Instead of 100 people being necessary, 60 people did the work more easily after the remodeling was done. Under the old arrangement, it was necessary for the chefs who did the broiling to take 4 steps in handling each chicken to be broiled. Because of the number of patrons, it was necessary to employ 3 chefs to do the broiling. After the remodeling, things were so arranged that such a chef could easily reach for the ice drawers in which the chickens were kept to the fire without taking a step. As a result, this work was done by 1 man instead of 3. Many an efficiency expert has done work or accomplished results much more remarkable than this little change. But to do this work and be certain of the results, the efficiency expert spends days in watching workers and collecting data. Then he often spends weeks in working out details, estimating distances and time, and calculating kinds of movement. Such men are just as able as I am, probably much more able to do their work, but I've learned to use vivid imaging, and so spend only a few hours in watching people move. I could carry back to my studio a vivid image in my mind, an exact mental picture of just what each employee was required to do and how he did it. I also had a vivid image in my mind of all the useless movements each individual's made. As I sat in my study, I repictured vividly the images of the kitchen, serving room, and dining room. I vividly imaged myself doing the work each one of the employees did. This vivid imaging took but a few moments, for when one thinks vividly, mind pictures move with lightning-like rapidity. Dreams are usually vivid, and when dreaming, the mind can picture the experience of years in a few seconds. It is this vivid imagery which brings success quickly. Every great industry which has ever been made successful, every railroad ever built, every invention ever conceived, resulted from vivid imaging. On the one hand, worlds of ideas affirmed and visioned lead only to failure. On the other, every man who has succeeded greatly first vividly imaged and idealized that which he intended to do. Vivid imaging compels you to recognize differences. Men who become great successes make decisions because of the differences, not because of the likeness. think vividly, perceive differences, and succeed. Although you train yourself to do your work well, and you plan your work with a purpose and think of the future and the profits, still you are nothing but an economic machine. When you wear out, you'll be discarded. But idealize yourself and your work, and you become a creative personality, and your value to others will increase through eternity. The doing process which always succeeds. We've just got done going over the chapter on vivid imaging. He gave us a two-part process. This is the second part of the process, the doing process, the idealized doing. Here is the process of success. It is a dual process. In the preceding chapter, I presented the mental process, which prevents mistakes. In this chapter, I present the doing process, which always leads to success. A process is the way in which a thing is done. There are 4 different ways. 1. Mere doing. 2. Doing with a purpose. 3. Doing which follows a thought-out plan. And 4. Idealized doing, which results from vivid imaging. Any one of these first 3 ways may result in success, but not one of them is a guarantee of success. In contrast, thinking in vivid images, followed by idealized doing, always brings success. In mines and stores, factories and offices, there are millions of earnest workers who have learned to do their work well, and then having learned, they drudge and toil but do not succeed. Mere doing never leads to success. Returning from one of my trips to Europe, I found much work to be done. Within 3 hours, I had telephoned an agency to send me 2 stenographers. One brought 4 letters from former employers. She had 17 years experience, and her recommendations stated that her work was rapid, exact, neat, and that she was very dependable. Each letter emphasized that she was a faithful worker, as her name was Anna. I at once thought of her as Faithful Anna. "How much do you wish?" I asked. "Well, with my experience, I couldn't work for less than $13 a week." Of course, I hesitated to employ her, for she had put such a low valuation on her services that it made me doubt her ability, but I needed someone at once, so I took her on trial. She took dictation well and transcribed it correctly, but when I asked her to answer some letters which required only routine replies, she replied, "Oh, I wouldn't know what to write." Later, when I outlined a simple subject and asked her to elaborate it, she replied, "Oh, I don't know anything at all about that." Yet, she had already been taking dictation on that subject for 3 days. And then one day, when her typewriter needed a little adjustment and I asked her to fix it instead of waiting for a repairman to come, she replied, "Oh, I wouldn't know what to do. I don't know a thing about a typewriter." And she was sincere. She didn't know knowledge of how a typewriter worked, although she had run one for 17 years. Anna the Faithful was almost 40. She was a faithful machine. She was satisfied merely to continue to do her work well. A machine does that. A machine wears out. So do people who limit their efforts to mere doing. Success is the reward of growth, not of wearing out. Purposeful doing is one step in advance of mere doing. It is stimulated by a desire to improve, and yet it does not guarantee success. One young man who had been in the same shipping office from 1910 to 1914 had been advanced to the head of a department. He had an idea of what to do and how to make good with the boss. He worked with a purpose. His idea was this: if I please the boss, he'll advance me. So with a definite purpose, he schemed and was advanced. But after the beginning of the Great War, there came to his firm the opportunity of greatly increased trade with Europe. He was chosen for important work, but failed to make good and was discharged within 3 months. Having a purpose is not enough for the success you want. The bank robber has a purpose, and lie always succeeds, sooner or later, in being caught. The tramp has a purpose in asking for a handout, and he always succeeds in making himself a useless member of society. Even well-intentioned and purposeful doing often fails. You know the "I've got an idea" man. He's enthusiastic and will work with a purpose first on one idea and then on another. But it is always someone else who makes a success of his ideas. Purposeful doing is based upon an idea or a desire, but it is usually a failure because it lacks an ideal. As the man with a purpose often fails, so also many a young man, intelligent, enthusiastic, hardworking, and earnest, starts in business for himself and fails, even after he has planned and thought out his entire problem. When he begins, he sees success within 2 or 3 years at the most, but in 6 months, the sheriff may close him up as a failure. Even planned doing, based upon ideas, desires, and thought-out processes, fails unless the process is idealized. Idealizing the process is more than merely thinking about the process. Thinking of how to do things has gone on since the world began. Everyone who has earnestly tried to succeed and who has failed has thought out what he wanted to do and how to do it. Such failures have been caused by a lack of idealizing the process. The process itself must be idealized, as well as the result one wishes to attain. It is such an idealized process which makes success certain. The meaning of the word ideal is not limited to moral or spiritual concepts of life. You can form an ideal of a table, of a home, of a bank account, or of the way of doing a thing. An ideal is a mental image of an object, condition, or process which is conceived to be complete. An idea differs from an ideal. When you have an idea of something, it is an idea because it is not complete. It does not include all the factors which should be included. An ideal, however, is complete. It includes all the essential factors. And since all mental factors are realized only by the use of vivid images of all the senses, an ideal is the result of vivid imaging. An ideal is a complete mental standard of that which you wish to become real. To idealize is to make an idea so complete that you will desire to exert effort to make it a reality. Idealization is the act of completing an idea in this way. Idealized doing embraces 1, idealizing the end you desire to attain, and 2, idealizing the process of obtaining it. Idealizing the process always succeeds. It is a guarantee of success. Yet many a person who has formed a definite ideal of what he wants to do, or he fails. Why? Why do such people fail to attain to their ideals? The answer is clear. Such people idealize the end they wish to attain, but they fail to idealize the process of doing what is necessary to attain to the end desired. I remember 2 educators. They did not know each other, but I knew both of them from the time they were boys. One was Jim, the other Charles. Both were determined to become college presidents. The ideal which each wished to attain was definite. Jim's aim was ideal. The standard he set for himself was a college presidency. Charles' aim was definite, but he limited it by material restriction as to the position he desired and failed to idealize the process of attaining it. Charles was determined to become the president of the college in his hometown. His ideal was limited materially to becoming the one particular president of one particular college in one particular town. Both Jim and Charles became noted in their college work. Both became college professors. Jim took one good position after another, always idealizing each position as a leading to the presidency of some renowned college. He succeeded in attaining to his ideal. Charles, however, kept his eye on that one particular college in his hometown. He failed to idealize the different positions which were offered to him, and did not take advantage of such positions, fearing that they would take him too far away from the goal of this particular ideal. There was no reason why Charles should not have become a college president except that he failed to idealize the steps of the process of attaining to what he desired. So, depreciating the positions offered, he again and again refused positions which would have led to college presidencies. Thousands failed to attain their desires because in attempting to make their aims definite, they restrict them as to time or condition. The ideal of the end you wish to attain should be definite, possible, and worthy. But if you restrict it, you will probably fail to attain it. If you're an architect, did you not as a boy long for the time when you could be a policeman? If you are a banker, did you not as a boy dream of the time when you would be the locomotive engineer running the train through your village? If you were a minister, did you not as a boy idealize the circus clown and train to become one? You did not attain the restricted ideal which you set up for yourself, yet you have attained your unlimited ideal, the ideal of doing something important and being somebody worthwhile. Life teaches one great lessons. When you idealize the process, the ideal you attain seldom comes dressed as you expect it to be dressed. It is always better and greater. Do not limit your ideal. The impossible of yesterday is the commonplace of today. The impossible of today will be the usual of tomorrow. There is but one limit to that which is possible. It is the limit of the means to be used. Possibilities are never limited by the nature of the problem. If you go to the top of the highest apartment building in Chicago and shout with all the power of your lungs, you will by such means fail to communicate with me in New York. But you fail only because of the means you use, not because of the nature of the problem. The problem is one of communication. Its possibilities are unlimited. So it is with every problem. Nothing limits you unless you limit the means you use. Thinking out the process may fail, but idealizing the process will always succeed. A few years ago, an additional main line subway was opened for use in New York City, and also a crosstown shuttle connecting the old subway with the new one. A new routing of passengers was necessary. More than 1 million people were compelled to learn to travel over new routes. For days before the new system was put in operation, the newspapers carried columns of descriptions of the new system and how to get from one point to another. Most of the people of New York read the directions before the opening. Hence, they had ideas about the new routes and they thought about them. But probably not 1 in 100,000 when he read the directions again and again idealized the process of using them. On the day of the opening, intelligent men and women crowded and jammed each other. They went where they did not wish to go. Many who had known New York City all their lives got lost. The jamming was so great at 2 transfer stations that women fainted, and so many were seriously hurt that it was necessary to close the crosstown subway for a month to prevent accidents, to prevent intelligent people from hurting each other because of their confused mob action. More than 1 million people lost their heads, and all of this confusion, trouble, injury, and delay could have been prevented if they had spent but 5 minutes in idealizing the process of traveling on the new subways. I take a description of the routes from a newspaper and read it carefully. Then I closed my eyes to idealize both the old and new routes. I idealized myself using the new route from my home to my office. I idealized myself riding on the cars, changing where the descriptions explained what changes should be made. I idealized every bit of the journey to my office door. Then I idealized one trip after another to other parts of the city until I had seen myself using every new and every old route of the subway. After this, it was impossible for me to be confused, impossible for me to make a mistake. Millions of others thought of the new routes, but certainly very few consciously realized and idealized themselves traveling over them. Yet every individual in New York could have done so in 5 minutes, if each had been in the habit of idealizing the process of doing things. The foregoing illustrates what I mean by idealizing the process. It makes the ideal of doing the thing complete in your mind before you actually do it. The success of idealizing the process and creating new things is shown in the first story which follows, and the efficiency of work due to idealizing the process is shown in the second. Idealizing the process creates inventions. 100 years ago, the only efficient instrument for cutting hay and grain was the scythe. The actual scythe was a long curved blade attached to a double curved handle. Many had tried to improve this instrument by sticking to their ideas and thoughts of its reality. They devised many different machines with curved blades, 2 or 3 at a time, as long as that scythe to be swung by machine power instead of arm power. All these efforts failed, although each of the men had ideas, desires, and thoughts about what he was doing and wanted to do. Then one man with an idealizing attitude took up the problem. He no longer thought of the actual instrument used to cut grain. In his mind, he idealized all the different processes of cutting. and all the different instruments which had been used for cutting. He took the problem out of the realm of reality into the realm of ideality. In his mind, he took all kinds of cutting machines apart and mentally destroyed their identity as actual machines. Instead of thinking machines, he idealized the process of cutting. Then, idealizing the process, he found that the scythe would not do it all as the basis of a moving machine, but that a sliding series of shear blades would work, and his invention was successful. This is more than imagination. Visualization and realization. Others had imagined and visualized the machines they wished to invent. The man who succeeded in inventing the mowing machine succeeded because he idealized the process of cutting. Although there are scores of ways by which your mind relates images of what to do and how to do it, there's only one way which guarantees success and efficiency. Vivid imagining is the basis of efficient action. Immediately following a cyclone in one of the cities of South America, physicians were called here and there to attend to the injured. So far as I know, all but one responded immediately to the first call. This one, even though people were running to his office begging him to go at once to this injured person or that one. Even though other people over his telephone were beseeching him to come over to this or that section of the city, did not leave his office until he had idealized the functional relation of all things, conditions, effects, and places which should or might be connected with what was to be done. First, he vividly imaged all the different kinds of injuries reported to him, and in addition, all the possible injuries he might be called upon to treat. Secondly, he vividly imaged all the medicines, antiseptics, instruments, accessories, etc., which would be required or which might be required. He also imaged his own supply and the surplus to be obtained at the drugstore. Third, he vividly imaged what should be done to aid the rapid recovery of those injured. The wisdom of wrapping each in a warm blanket immediately after first aid as protection from the afterchill of the storm. Fourth, he vividly imaged the places at which the most seriously injured were reported to be, imaged himself going from one place to the next by the shortest routes, and then he repeated the process, imaging in order the places at which the less seriously injured were reported to be. Then he began action. He scribbled a list of certain materials he would need. He ordered his assistant to get such materials at the drugstore at the next corner and to stand at the curb so that he might grab them from her hands when he should start out. He telephoned a department store a block beyond the drugstore, ordering a clerk to stand in front of the store with 50 blankets. He selected from his operating room every instrument which might be necessary, and he ran to his ear, drove to the drugstore, to the department store, and then on his way to the injured. As a physician, he was no better than many other physicians in the city, but the records show that during the 4 hours following the cyclone, he attended more than twice as many cases as many other physicians in the city, and that not one of those whom he attended suffered subsequently because of chills. This is 100% increase of cases attended, and his 100% efficiency in preventing subsequent collapse was the result of 5 minutes he spent in idealizing the process of functional relationships of every factor of his plan before beginning to carry it out. He did this in less than 5 minutes because it had been his practice for years to idealize the process of doing things. Your ideal of the end you desire to attain is the star to which you should hitch your wagon of attainment, but very much depends upon the way in which you do the thinking. Idealized doing always succeeds. And so that is the two-step process that Landone discusses in his book, The Success Process. Vivid imaging and idealized doing. Those two processes are immensely powerful. It has been the reason for all major inventions. Just look at the discoveries of Einstein. When Einstein imagined the speed of light, just by looking at the mathematics of it, he's not going to discover anything. He put himself on that beam of light and then imagined what it would be like to look at someone else on another beam of light. And therefore we have this idea of relativity. Well, it goes to everything. The idea of idealizing the process is critical. A lot of people are so focused on the end goal, they're never happy with the journey. More importantly, they don't do the process of imagining that process you have to go through to achieve it. They talk about this in reality transurfing. If you want to become a lawyer, imagine the end process, but imagine going through the process of becoming a lawyer, getting your degree, all the different things that you have to do. There is a process for whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And in imagining the process, you overcome pitfalls. You avoid any problems along the way. Go through a process. And he mentioned something that's very true. You can imagine a sequence of events, 5 years, in a flash. I know you know what I'm talking about. You've imagined driving to the movie theater and all the things that you're going to have to do in a flash. When you really are vividly imaging properly, you can collapse time. So, for instance, hey, what time should we leave to go to the movies? If I sit and just vividly think about this, I know that I'm going to have my kids with me. We're going to have to buy some popcorn. We will need to get there on time. We're going to have previews that are going to be playing. So what time do I need to go? Well, I need to figure in all of the little things that will happen with my kids and ordering food in order to have enough time to go, instead of just simply stating a time. I know that's a pretty basic idea, but it's pretty much anything that you're doing. When he's talking about vivid imaging, he's talking about it in motion. And he's mentioning all of the senses: balance, motion, heat, movement, interaction, cause and effect. All those things that you are not going to imagine if you're just setting up a snapshot or a figure, that you are just imagining this final thing. So go about that, and your mind will tell you little things about the process, what is wrong, flaws, mistakes, things to fix, and you'll become much better at creating your reality because you've gone through this process of vivid imagining or vivid imaging, which is what he describes. I think he does a pretty good job of explaining it, but there's not an actual explanation because we're describing what's going on in your mind. And I wish there was a way we could play it on this screen that you're watching right now so I could show you this is what vivid imaging is, but it's not, because there's no way to put it on a video. It's something that you're imagining from multiple aspects. When you vividly imagine something or vivid image something, you're looking at it from all angles, in movement, cause and effect, in feeling, all those things, and how it interacts with all other factors. So these two things, if you vivid image something and then idealize the process of it and idealize the end of it, you can never fail, because you've found a way to consider all of the negative effects that can happen. You can use this for relationships, you can use this for health, you can use this for your business, in everything. Just remember, just give yourself a second and do that vivid imaging that he's talking about. Play it out. Play out the cause and effect of it, the movement of it, the feeling of it, all the senses of it. You know how to do this. You've done it before. And if you haven't, then work on it. Get better at it. It is a skill that you can acquire, that you can get better at over time. Brown Landone is a fantastic author, and we'll definitely return to him, but I thought that this would be a good place for those that are struggling. It's just a way of changing how you visualize. You want to visualize, but as Neville Goddard even says, you have to come from the place that you're imagining. Don't look at it from third person, come from that first person perspective. Live it, feel it, use all of your senses, follow the process of it. And then in the process, you'll have idealized doing. You'll know all the things that you need to do in the process to get to that goal. It's simple, it's easy, but it's very powerful. And we often don't do this. We make our imaging very simple, and we don't consider all the factors involved. It doesn't require genius. It's just a different way of imaging. And this is why you create realities when you do this, because you're imagining all the factors, and it's easier to act out that reality and create it, even with your own hands, because you've figured out all of the necessary factors involved in the process of creating that reality. I'd love to know your impressions of Brown Landone. If you have any other of his books that you'd like me to read, put them in the comments. I'll also take any other suggestions that you guys have. I'm always open to reading and discussing new things at all times. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.